Hello and welcome to the Project Learn microlearning focused on homework help and tutoring. As we get started, think of a time when you struggled to understand something until someone coached you through it. If you're with your colleagues, you can pause and take a moment to share your examples with one another. I think about when I was learning chemistry and hearing the information in class for the first time, it didn't quite sink in for me. And spending a little bit of extra time after school with someone who could walk me through the problems, slow things down, and break each problem into smaller components was tremendously helpful. This session is focused on homework help and tutoring, one of the key components of Project Learn. And the main set of resources designed to support you, in addition to the Project Learn manual, are the resources found in Power Hour. Power Hour is one of Boys and Girls Clubs of America's foundational education programs, and it includes a suite of resources that can help your club be more effective at homework help and tutoring, in addition to helping young people build academic and social and emotional skills. A few tools and resources that I want to highlight for you. One is the Power Hour Resource Guide. This includes guidance for setting up your space so that you can set up a space that's a conducive learning environment. Recruiting volunteers, since homework help and tutoring often requires a large group of volunteers so that you can offer that small group instruction to youth. Building partnerships with schools and school leaders, as well as with other organizations that can support homework help and tutoring. Tracking participation and incentives to keep all of the logistics under control, and then some recommended technologies, since education technology can be hugely helpful for homework help and tutoring. So this resource guide is sort of a big picture how to set up a homework help and tutoring program, some of the nuts and bolts and tools and templates that you might need to recruit and train volunteers or reach out to schools. Power Hour targeted program is more of a session by session traditional program. So this is going to be a collection of developmentally appropriate sessions that support academic and social and emotional skill building. The sessions are both some one-time sessions, like a session on growth mindset that teaches a specific skill, and some sessions that are designed to be repeated. So there's a book club session, for instance, that you could offer every Tuesday, or a group tutoring session that you could offer every Wednesday or twice a week, using different content, but using the existing framework of group tutoring. Specific to homework help, there's a session in here that gives you some options for how you can structure homework help, and you could run that session as often as you want. Ensuring that you use all of the elements of a high quality session, like a warm welcome, a community builder, a main activity, a specific opportunity to reflect, and to give some shout outs and celebrate the progress youth are making. So that's a great resource if you want to know how to structure a given session of homework help or group tutoring or individual tutoring. Another key set of resources are the Power Hour activity books. These are Common Core aligned activities, the Common Core being the set of national academic standards that describe specific things youth should learn how to do, like be able to write a persuasive essay or solve a problem that uses two variables. These Common Core aligned activities are divided into 4 age groups, which you'll see in a minute, and they're also divided into math and reading. The goal of these is to support tutors. So if you are running a homework help and tutoring program and you recognize, for instance, that a group of young people could use some help multiplying and dividing fractions, then you could pull the multiplying and dividing fractions activity from the activity book for that grade level and offer that as a session or an activity. Simple sessions shouldn't require a ton of setup, but it's a way to specifically target the academic skills that youth need help with. You can see from this table of contents, for instance, some of the types of specific skills that are built, things like comparing and contrasting two passages or ratios and proportional relationships. For early elementary and upper elementary, when you look in the program documents file on bgca.net on the Power Hour page, you'll see that there's a different book for math activities and for reading activities. For middle school and high school, the math and reading activities are combined into one book. So those are some of the key Power Hour resources that are designed to support you in homework help and tutoring. Yes, Power Hour is a different program with a unique brand, but as we've mentioned, Project Learn is really a holistic overall strategy, and there are several programs that can fit under that umbrella. A few pieces of advice if you're just getting started with homework help and tutoring. One is to consider the needs and assets of your community. This might be an opportunity to do some community asset mapping to find out if there are existing tutoring programs that you could partner with, or to look into some of the organizations and potential partners in your area, which might include libraries or universities that have students who are looking for work-study positions. It might include nearby organizations that have employees who want to volunteer. Families and caregivers are often a great source of potential volunteers, as are older siblings and interns who are part of a work-based learning experience in the club. Considering the needs of your community is also an opportunity for you to ask a lot of questions, to ask young people what they could use some help with when it comes to homework help and tutoring, to ask their families and caregivers the same question, and to talk with them about what would be most helpful as your club starts to offer homework help and tutoring. Another important step is to identify and train tutors. There are lots of things you should look for in a strong tutor, and you can find that information in the Power Hour resource guide. One thing I'll say as an initial guidepost is that you'll need different types of tutors for elementary youth and for high school and middle school youth. For elementary youth, it's important that your tutors are familiar with child development and they understand how to talk to a third grader, or what it means for a first grader to be learning how to read in a certain way. Whereas with middle and high school, it's more important that your tutors have some subject matter expertise, that they feel confident with algebra or with history or whatever the actual subject is. So oftentimes clubs will group elementary youth just by age or together with tutors, whereas you might want to split up your middle and high school tutors by subject area so that tutors are supporting youth in a subject that they're really confident in. Another key aspect to getting started is to communicate the opportunities and expectations that you have to families and caregivers, to let them know when your club is going to offer homework help and tutoring, how they need to sign up if you're asking youth to sign up or register, what kind of information they need to bring, or what your expectations are for youth while they're involved in homework help and tutoring. This is a best practice for establishing expectations, but it's also a reminder to engage families and caregivers as co-educators and keep them up to date about what you're doing and about what they are expecting of you. Agree on a structure for tutoring, figuring out which spaces you're going to use in the club, what time frame tutoring is going to be available, what some of the logistics are going to look like. And one important thing I want to call out is that there should be no one-on-one contact between youth and tutors. This is true if you have tutors and youth working in person or virtually. So of course, we wouldn't want a tutor and a single young person in a room by themselves in the club. You also wouldn't want a tutor and a single young person in a Zoom room or an online meeting by themselves. You want to ensure that there's always a group and that someone's always supervising. That doesn't mean you can't have individualized conversations, but if you have a tutor and a young person working at one side of a table and another tutor and a young person working on the other side of the table and other youth and staff in the room, then that's a best practice for child safety. Finally, setting up a comfortable functional learning environment where you have all the tools you need. Youth are going to be able to focus, and maybe they have some options for whether they're going to work independently on homework, whether they're going to work with a tutor, or whether they're going to collaborate with a group. A few other promising practices. Of course, you want to have your materials ready to go. You don't want your homework help and tutoring program to be stalled because someone forgot a pencil or someone needs help getting a resource that you could easily provide, including something for youth who don't have homework that day. A common challenge for homework help and tutoring is that if you serve young people from multiple schools and multiple grade levels, everyone is not going to walk into your club with the same amount of homework for that day. So it's always important to have a great activity available for young people who don't have any homework to do. Establishing group agreements. This means that at the beginning of the school year and then periodically, you check in on what your agreements are for that space. That means asking people, how do you want to feel while you're in this homework help and tutoring time? What can we do to help feel that way? And what are we going to do when there's conflict? You can post those group agreements somewhere where you can commonly reference them. And these are community agreements as opposed to just rules about what to do and what not to do. I've mentioned before that if you use the Power Hour targeted program as a structure for the way that you offer homework help and tutoring and different sessions that build academic and social and emotional skills, then these elements of a high quality session are already built in. The welcome, the community builder, the reflection, the recognition. If you're designing your own homework help and tutoring sessions, just make sure that you include those as well, so that you're starting with a warm welcome and a community builder or an emotional check-in, and you're ending with reflection and recognition. One other promising practice is to encourage youth to set daily goals and then celebrate their progress toward the goals. It can be tempting only to celebrate the big wins at the end of the year, but it's important to celebrate those small victories along the way as well. Probably the most important part about homework help and tutoring is the actual facilitation for the people in the room who are helping with homework or who are helping with tutoring. And so what you see on this slide is a checklist of staff practices that are based in research and are some of the best practices for supporting homework help and tutoring. I want you to take a moment to read through these staff practices and identify if there's anything you see that you already do well when you're helping young people with homework help and tutoring, and see if there's anything that you could work on. I'll call out a few aspects of these staff practices. Modeling curiosity is a great way to encourage young people to fall in love with learning and to help them to be more self-motivated learners who are able to do the hard thinking on their own and be more independent. You can model curiosity by asking questions yourself, like, oh, I wonder how that happened, or that's so interesting, why do you think that is? And encouraging youth to ask questions. So this can come up in homework help and tutoring if you're reading about something or watching a video about something and you just start to say, I wonder why that happened. What do you think? Helping youth connect new learning to previous experiences. The reason for this is the concept of structural knowledge, that when we learn new bits of information, we need to hang it on an existing structure. So just learning a flurry of facts that all sort of float around on their own, it's really tough to remember those facts or make any sense of them. But if you can learn something new and hang it on a structure that's already in your brain, or hang it on some previous learning, some previous experiences, you're much more likely to remember it. You're much more likely to be able to recall it later. So the way that you can do this when you're doing homework help and tutoring is, if you're reading about something that seems new and different, you can try to relate it to something that young people already know. So if you're helping a young person with their physics homework and you're trying to understand projectiles, you could ask them about, if they're interested in sports, what have you noticed about shooting a basketball? What's the difference between shooting a basketball from the free throw line, or if you're really close to the basket? What did you notice about the arc of the ball? So finding ways to connect the content in their homework to something they've experienced before or something they're familiar with is really helpful. That's also going to help you get to know the youth that you're supporting as a tutor, because in order to connect to things that they've experienced, you have to get to know them. Third, asking questions to check for understanding and to prompt youth to think about their thinking. This is sort of a two-part practice. Checking for understanding is such a critical best practice for supporting learning. The way not to do it is to ask, do you understand? Because when you ask a young person, do you understand? They'll usually say yes. Or if you ask a young person, do you have any questions? They'll usually say no. A better way to check for understanding is to basically ask the young person to explain to you what they've just learned. So instead of saying, do you understand how to write a question instead of a declaratory sentence, you could say, could you give me an example of a sentence that's written as a question? And make sure that the example they give you is in fact a question. Another way to check for understanding is to look back at a problem you just did and say, could you explain to me why we did this step? Asking questions to prompt youth to think about their thinking. This is the idea of metacognition, that when we can think about the way that our brain is working, it helps us to be more effective thinkers. The way you can do that is when you notice a young person has an insight or an aha, that you can say, how did you come up with that idea? How did you make that connection? What made you ask that question after we did this step? So asking youth to sort of unpack their thinking, explain their thoughts. One phrase that people use for this is a think aloud, to say, will you say everything you're thinking out loud, as a way to think about your own thinking. Teaching learning strategies in addition to content. This just looks like helping with things that are sometimes called study skills. So if a young person's trying to learn a lot of vocabulary words, you could say, maybe we should make flashcards. That's a good learning strategy for learning vocabulary words. Or if they're trying to understand how a lot of things in history connect, you could say, what if we drew a diagram to try to explain how these things connect? That's a good learning strategy. So this is a quick checklist, but it's 4 really impactful practices. You could use this in your own continuous quality improvement to set an intention for each week or each month and say, this is a practice I really want to focus on this week. Or at the end of a tutoring session, you could look back at these 4 practices and say, which ones did I do today and which ones do I need to focus on tomorrow? Or if you're someone who supervises staff, you could use this checklist to check in with your tutors and ask them what they're doing well, ask them what they need support with, or if you observe them, to point out what you notice them doing and what opportunities you see. So let's reflect. First, think for a moment about 3 go-to questions that you can ask youth during homework help and tutoring. What are some questions that you can always have in your back pocket to ask young people? I'll give you a few examples. One good one is to say, what is this question really asking? Or what information do you have in the question that might help you solve the problem? Another good question to ask is, which words in the problem do you not understand that we might need to look up a definition for? But there are lots of other questions, like what might be the first step? How did you think about that? What other questions do you have about this problem? So feel free to pause if you want to talk with a colleague about some go-to questions you can ask. And a second reflection question, what plans do you need to make with your colleagues in order to support a great homework help and tutoring experience? Maybe you need to talk with all of your colleagues about what people are comfortable with. Maybe you need to ask everybody if there's a certain subject that they would feel really comfortable tutoring or a subject that they really wouldn't feel comfortable tutoring. Maybe you need to ask all of your colleagues if there's an age group that they think they'd be more effective working with. Maybe you need to agree on how you all are going to set group agreements, what your expectations are for homework help and tutoring, how you're going to communicate to families and caregivers. So whatever you are currently doing, think about what plans you might still need to make with your colleagues in order to support a great homework help and tutoring experience. So take a moment for that one as well. Finally, some things to try next in order to support great homework help and tutoring experiences. One is on bgca.net, visit the Power Hour page and download the resources that I mentioned. Download the resource guide, the targeted program guides, and the activity books for every age group in math and reading. Second, sketch out a plan for your next few homework help and tutoring sessions. Maybe look at the Power Hour targeted program and decide if you're going to offer those sessions as they're all presented, or if there is a combination of sessions that you want to ensure repeats every week. But think about which sessions you're going to offer, what you're going to do in the next couple of homework help and tutoring sessions. And then think specifically about how the staff and volunteers who are supporting this work are going to be working with youth.